little pieces of paper at the front of your pews. Ask the question, who are you? Who are you? If someone was to ask you that question, how would you answer them? Bryce, if somebody said, who are you? What would you say?
I'm blind.
You don't know? Well, would you, if I said, who are you, would you tell me your name? Okay, so we would start probably with our names. So you would say, I'd say, who are you? Bryce. All right. What else would we tell somebody if they asked who we are? What? Where you live. Okay. We might start out saying where we live. Good, Di. I'm from Latrobe. What else might we tell somebody if they asked who are you? What you do? Yeah, we like to kind of slide that in there. What do we do? What do we do? Who are you? It's a pretty easy question, right? But it's an important one because our answer of who you are speaks volumes. Not only about who we are, but about whose we are. Who are you? Who are you, Linda? Christian. Who are you, Ken? Who are you, Aura?
Member of this church.
Member of this church. Oh, those are all beautiful answers. Understanding how you answer the question of who you are will also help you understand God better. Anybody in here want to understand God better? I know I do. Who are you? We're doctors and lawyers. We've got some cab drivers here and some teachers. We've got people who work for the state. We've got pianists, organists. We've got singers, dancers. We're fathers and mothers. We're brothers and sisters and sons and daughters. And then we sometimes describe ourselves by adjectives, don't we? We're adaptable. We're resourceful. We're full of compassion or love. We're generous or thoughtful. And we are filled with the Holy Spirit. We often forget that part, don't we? When I ask you who you are and you're in church, like Linda and Ken and Aura, they all answered with church answers because they were in church. But when we walk outside of those doors, I think sometimes we forget who we are and whose we are. Because how often when somebody asks you that question, who you are, do you respond like Linda or Ken or Aura? How often do you respond first and foremost that I am Cindy, child of God? And that's what John reminds us about, that Holy Spirit that comes to us in baptism in our text today. John tells the people as they started to gather together and as they started to wonder if in fact he was the Messiah, he tells them, no, I come to baptize you with water, but somebody who's more powerful than I, somebody whose sandal I am not even worthy to untie, he will come and he will baptize you with Holy Spirit and the fire. That's more than the promise of water. That's more than the promise of words. It's more than the promise of what the world promises us. Jesus will baptize us with the Holy Spirit and with fire. Jesus will give us a new identity. Because that's what this is all about. No longer are we Cindy or Linda or Ken or Aura. Now we are Cindy, child of God. Now we are Linda, God's beloved. Now we are Ken, child of God, and Aura, beloved. We get that new identity. Like we told Bonnie when she was baptized, no longer is she Bonnie Pickle, now she is Bonnie, child of God. And that's what we remember when we come up here to this font beloved. Not only is the Holy Spirit here in this church or here in this font, the Holy Spirit is here in our hearts. And that Holy Spirit is the gift that Jesus gives us. Think about that for a minute. Part of God is inside of you. It's amazing we don't all just run out of the church screaming. Ah! when we walk away from this font, like Bonnie walked back to her pew, we forget what that water symbolizes. We forget what we came here to celebrate in the first place. We forget what lies inside of us. We forget because the world wears us down. When bad things happen, what's the first thing we do? Who do we blame? God, yeah. When we try and we fail, when we think we don't measure up, who's the first one we think we don't measure up to? God. We fall short of God's love or does something that disappoints us. We do something that disappoints ourselves. Or like last night in my text, I texted Lauren, I'm so disappointed in our football team. Who do we get mad at? God. Yeah. God. We forget what John reminds us of today. We forget that Jesus came here out of his love for us. Think about that for a minute. That God left heaven, God left this wonderful, beautiful place where God was being worshipped and glorified to come down to this earth, like we celebrated not too long ago, as a babe in a manger. He came for you. He knows. He understands what you're going through because he's been through it himself. Jesus had an earthly mother and an earthly father and brothers and sisters. So he understands our joy. He understands what it means to love someone so much it hurts. Because he's been there. When Jesus came to live among us, he taught and he ministered. And he taught us how to care for the sick and give hope to the poor and love the unlovable. And so Jesus understands us, beloved, when we're frustrated, when we're exhausted, when we just feel like we can't go on, because Jesus has lived it himself. Jesus came here to live among us, beloved, and give his life for us. He gave himself up willingly to the Roman authorities as they marched him to Calvary, where he stretched out his arms and he died for us. And so he understands our grief and our pain and our loss because he himself has lived it. Jesus came to live among us. And his baptism, the reason we're here today, is all about his identity being made public. When that Holy Spirit came down out of heaven and landed on Jesus, Luke is telling us, yes, he is the Son of God. But more than that, in case we had any doubts, we hear God's voice that says, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." And here's the good news for us. Through our baptisms, we too are given that identifier as beloved children of God. Through our baptisms, we are given a new name. It starts with the letter B. I've been calling you it all through the sermon. Anybody have any idea what your new name is? Beloved, yes. You are God's beloved children. And with you, God is well pleased. When God looks at you, Ken, God doesn't see what the rest of the world sees. When God looks at you, Anne, God sees something different. God sees inside each one of our hearts. And he sees us as the beloved children that we are. God sees you as saved, Rosella. God sees you, Frank, as forgiven. God sees you, Joe, as loved. Lori, you are God's beloved, and with you, God is well pleased.
I'm in first.
Do you remember that question I asked you at the very beginning of the sermon? The one that's printed on the paper. Who are you? Yes. Who are you? Take a minute. There's pens and there's papers. Take a minute and fill that out. Who There's a basket at the end of the sanctuary back there. And I'm asking you to fill these out and put them back in there so I can use them as part of my class. Who are you? And what will you do with that knowledge? My apologies, Wire. I always forget to leave some on here for you. You got them?